Back in the 1980s, if you wanted to ride the top sports bike, you'd have needed to own a Yamaha FZR 1000 X-Up. But the X-Up ruled only until 1992, when Honda released their now world-famous CBR 900, the Fireblade. The blade broke the mould for sports bikes. Huge amounts of power with handling to match. Poor old Yamaha had no answer to this, but in '96 they launched the Thunder Ace, and although it had massive power, it never really cut the mustard in the looks or the handling department, and today it's become known more as a sports tourer. So the blade lived on. But all that was about to change in 1998, because then came Yamaha's YZF R1, a sports bike with sharp styling, fantastic handling and superb braking to cope with its 150 brake horsepower. The R1 has sold in huge numbers, and today it just gets better and better. The latest 2001 model has had more than 150 changes made to it. Many of these are minor ones, perhaps a few nuts, bolts and washers here and there, but some have been quite significant. Big changes have taken place in the gearbox. The early models, although great fun, did have a tendency to send the front wheel skywards in first and second gear. The gearing now has been changed. First and second gears are now longer in an attempt to keep the front end down and to make the bike more rideable. Thankfully though, it hasn't taken away any of the fun, and thrashing an R1 still produces a huge grin factor. Now, if you're very observant, you may have noticed that this particular machine that I'm riding is not the 2001 model, it's the 2000 model. Well, how do you know the difference? Well, it's dead easy. Certainly with the red example, it's dead easy to tell, because the 2001 model that you can buy today in the showroom has got a carbon front fender. This one hasn't. It's got the red plastic sort of colour matched one. There's a carbon front fender on the 2001. Also on the latest model, the graphic on the side here is slightly different. Only slightly. You can notice it more on the tank actually, on this bit here. If you look at the 2001, this little transfer here is a bit more fancy. It's got bits of black in it. But really, that's the only changes between last year's and this year's model. As I said before, loads of changes, massive amount of changes to the R1 since it first came out back in '98. We've already mentioned the gearbox, that's different, sort of a bit more rideable. But there are some obvious changes. The shape is slightly different. It's kind of still the same sort of thing really, but it is slightly different. The fairing that has been revised, that's the word they like to use these days, and Yamaha like to say that the fairing now is slippier. It's a slippier bike. What on earth does that mean? Well, what they actually mean is it's actually more aerodynamic. It's got a better drag coefficient and all technical things like that. Don't understand it myself, but slightly different shape, but still looks dead smart. Engine more or less the same, loads and loads of changes, as I say, different nuts, bolts, washers, all that, like I said before, but more or less the same sort of thing. 150 brake horsepower that thing develops there, inline 4-cylinder. Very, very short, the engine on the R1, and that's really the key to its success, its handling. Very, very short. We've also got magnesium engine covers now, which help to save weight, down to just over 170 kilos with this, which puts it in the same ballpark as a 600cc bike, more or less. So astonishing power to weight ratio, but very, very short engine, which means we've got a very, very long swing arm, massive long swing arm. Pivot point is right up there, right on the back of the engine, very, very far forward. All heavily braced GP style swing arm, that's what they call these now, with this nice fancy little hugger on the back to stop all the muck going under your seat. Suspension, that's been, well, I was going to say changed. It's not been changed, it's the same sort of thing really, but it's been revised. The settings are now different, and the whole thing feels better, it handles better. And that's what they've tried to do with this. They've tried to make the bike a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit easier to ride, if you like. But what they've not done, and I think what Honda, in many people's eyes, have been guilty of over the years, they've killed off the Fireblade a little bit. They've made it very, very tame, very, very user-friendly, and kind of killed it, taken the edge off it. The early Fireblades, you'll remember, they were an animal. You couldn't ride them, they were all over the place, but they were great fun. They've tried to do a little bit of that with the R1, but I'm glad to say they've kept loads of the fun, and in no way have they killed any of the excitement out of the R1. This bike can be as mad as you like, but remember, the throttle works both ways. It's quite happy to plod through a village at 30 miles an hour. I'll agree, not much fun on a 1000cc superbike, but nevertheless, it can be done. It's out on the road though that the R1 really comes into its own. Massive amounts of power with a tremendous rush from around about 8,000 all the way to the red line at just below 12,000. Sharp handling, fantastic brakes and the flickiest machine you could ever wish for. Well, if all that's tickled your fancy and you would like to purchase one of these, it will cost you £8,800. That's the list price. But forget list prices, because today it's very difficult for any dealer to sell a bike at the list price, and I think it's fair to say that you could probably take one of these brand new out of a showroom for just over 7 grand. 7 grand for all that performance, all that style and huge amounts of street cred.